It's time for another episode of the Cultural Hall and sort of an out-of-studio appearance, both for me and for Curtis Francom. His name's not Curtis, and he's been on several times. Episode 226, if you want to get to know all about Kurt Francom. But that's not what we're doing today. You have written a book.
That's right, Richie. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here. It's interesting. Kurt and I... when was it? I want to give people a little bit of context because though you came on very strong when I first met you. You're like,
did I really?
Hey, well, because you did this. I think it was in the early days of leading LDS when you were like, hey, come, we're having this thing at Salt Lake Community College. And what I thought it was like me and you and maybe a couple of other people. And you just like wanted to find out like how I do podcasts or something like that, right? You wanted to, you sort of couch it like there's a thing I want to tell you about and some other people are coming. And I show, and I feel like most people, certainly Intermountain West people will know what I'm talking about, but where you realize very quickly you were invited to something that wasn't what you were actually invited to.
Oh, come on.
And it was like 60 people and you had a PowerPoint, and there could have been more, but you had a PowerPoint and you're like, and the vision I'm casting, and I was like, oh boy. And then we had like cookies and punch at the end of
That's
the
right.
thing. Yeah.
That's right. That back then that was my 60 richest friends, and you were on that list.
Well,
that's how bad it was, Richie.
Just because of the name.
Yeah, that's right. Rich, he must be Richie.
You're like, I have 45 friends, and I got a couple guys named Richard. All right, we'll get them
We'll
in
get
there.
them there. Yeah.
But that's where you sort of started, and then obviously because of the space that we're in, the community, the network is small. Everyone sort of knows everyone. You don't like everyone necessarily.
I don't, or you don't?
I don't.
Speak for yourself there, Richie.
I mean, you don't like everyone in the space. I mean, you're a nice enough guy that you, to their face, would tell you that you like everyone. But yeah, I mean, you have your favorites, and you're certainly one of mine.
Oh, go on.
The name of your book is an instant thing to me because I've seen you post about it multiple times, and I think everybody has the same inclination when they see the title of your book. It's called "Is God Disappointed in Me?" and it's one of two things that everyone responds. One is, yes, Kurt, very much he is, very much some sort of joke response,
yes,
right?
Yes, lots of joke responses.
And then the very like either Jesus defiant or grace defiant that are like, no, absolutely not. How could you even believe? And so props for a great title.
Right? It's memorable that way.
Yeah.
If you need a joke about it, sure, but you won't forget it.
Yeah. I would be curious to you. We'll obviously get into what the context of the book is, but you and I can sort of joke around about this. Did you have to write a book? And is a class that you're teaching next? And are you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, my consulting practice on the side. And
exactly. It seems very like 2024, which is when we're recording this, to be like, well, Kurt, he started with just a great idea, and then it evolved into a greater idea, and then he wrote a book about it, and now you can follow his class, and he's got a mastermind that he'll be meeting in Mexico, and if you don't mind, like it just starts. Some of that is marketing, which is your background,
right?
But was the book just another device, or was it something more that you're like, I am really wondering, is God disappointed in me?
That's a fantastic question. No, the short answer is no. I do not have a is God disappointed in me ink that's coming on the scene. You can hire me. No. So I guess where this came from, I did an episode because I do these virtual conferences, as you know. You've helped promote many of them. And one was about, it was called Liberating Saints, about how to mentor and help people overcome pornography. Mm-hmm. And a big part of really any sin or helping anybody through anything is shame, because in my opinion, it's the adversary's strongest tool. And so I did this 60-minute podcast episode that I included in the library in this virtual conference about this question: is God disappointed in you? Because I feel like as I interact with Latter-day Saints, from the nursery age, we're taught, well, God loves you and you're a child of God. Let's sing the hymn, right? But then at some point we sort of give this unintentional message, which comes from the adversary. Like, yes, God loves you, but Richie, he is sure disappointed in you and your choices and your decisions. And and people see me as I'm the leadership guy, right? In the church with leading saints. Why not write a leadership book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Bishops, right? Sure. But
that, by the way, has been trademarked and is coming to.
I'll probably work with that title.
Yeah.
But this one, in my opinion, shame is an understanding of shame is at the core of leadership. Like if you don't understand the dynamics of shame, if you're a bishop and someone walks in your office just beat up and lost and beating themselves up because of shame, you don't have a starting point. You'll never be able to get to the pure doctrines that are so healing if shame is in the way. So that episode was so popular, and I saw it, in the analytics that it was getting more and more attention. People kept talking about it. People would ask me to come do firesides on this topic. So I thought, maybe I should put all this thought into a book and explore this concept of godly disappointment and shame. And does it have a role in our mortal experience? Is it good, bad? Is it encouraging? Is it motivating? Why or why not?
Sure.
And that turned into the book.
So in the concept of shame, like people will talk about like, there's guilt and there's shame, and guilt is that you have done something wrong. Shame is that you are something wrong. Is that sort of how within a gospel context you take on this shame as well?
And I think that's been since since the Sister Brene Brown entered the scene.
Not actually a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
That's right. But, that's sort of the dichotomy that's articulated. And I think it's been used so much that it's become cliche, that we sort of lost some meaning in that. So the way I frame it is that shame is an attack on the identity, the divine identity. So anytime we feel shame, or even are motivated by shame, we're actually being motivated by the wrong reasons. We're being motivated to prove who our identity is. But as we know, at the core of our doctrine, that identity was established long ago, and we're on this mortal journey. I mean, the pinnacle of our faith experience is the temple, where you go to be endowed from on high with an identity. And so identity plays an important role that when we feel shame, it's not that, that you just feel bad or you feel beat up. It's no, like your identity is being attacked, and we have to get that out of the way before we can actually move forward, because you'll find strength from your divine identity.
So the idea really, when we talk and sing about, I'm a child of God, sort of, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, that you're like, well, the greatest gift that the adversary has, the greatest tactic, I guess I should say, is to make you forget that you're a child of God.
Who you are. Yeah, it's that identity for sure.
So let me ask you this. I always will razz you about church leadership because you're one who's like, yes, give me all the church leadership.
That's right.
And to me, I'm like, pass. I can't anyway, but also no thank you if I could. When you had the opportunity to serve as, I think probably most commonly, I think it's a bishop, right? Where you're sort of boots on the ground and people come in and they're like, it's infidelity, it's, pornography, it's life is rough at home, it's my kids and all those things. Talk to me about how shame and like that identity, first of all, gets lost with those individuals as they would come. I don't need specific stories or names, but then is this something that you look back into those scenarios and go, had I known any better, I would have done all of this? Or was it something you started to figure out in that time? And then how was it able to make itself?
Yeah, so I have a lot of regrets when it comes to my time as bishop.
Tell me, I'm curious.
Well, I was in an inner city ward. Sure. I was called at 28 years old to be a bishop, and that wasn't because I was some, shining light in the ward. It was. We know. I mean, there weren't a lot of options, to say the least, right? So there I was, like trying to do my best. I remember on day one, I'm set apart, ordained as a bishop. Mm-hmm. My executive secretary hands me my schedule. The individual walks in, and he's like, "Bishop, I'm struggling with pornography," and I'm just like, 28-year-old marketing grad. Hey, I mean, have you tried not to look at pornography? Like, right? Like that was.
Hey, hold on. Let me write that down. Don't do that.
Got it. Thanks, Bishop. Right? And because I just didn't have that perspective, I didn't know the dynamics of shame that were working there. I think of another instance, a brother in my ward who was about my age, had a handful of kids, but was moved into my ward because he was separating from his wife and going through a divorce. And I looked at his life, and he'd done the same things as me. He'd done the seminary thing, went on the mission, went to college, got married in the temple. And I remember thinking, why am I on this side of the desk and you're on that side of the desk? Right. And I think what we don't realize is that shame, there's a lot more going on than we realize when someone is struggling with sin. And we often default to behaviors. Like I was like, well, just stop looking at the pornography, or
read this chapter,
or here's an Ensign article that you should really check out, right? And we default to behaviors because we don't know what else to do. And we do this with ourselves. The new year starts, 2024. This is the year, Richie. We default to
for what, Kurt?
Well, we set goals, right?
I know. I'm just teasing. But here we are. We're recording this in February, and it's like, the year for what? What is this the year for?
But when we want to change or have a transformation in our life, we first start with behaviors. When in reality, there's a step before that, and that is full acceptance of who you are right now, because it is through that acceptance, and this is the paradoxical God that we worship, is that when we feel accepted completely today for who we are, the identity we've been given, and that he accepts us fully, even if we never change, then we begin to change. And we can't begin to change if we just hyper-focus on behaviors. Like, well, okay, maybe I'll do, temple attendance 4 times a month this year, and see, maybe that will lead to my life will get better, right? And I even still hear in Sunday school classes sometimes of like, isn't it great, like, when you keep the commandments, like, life is just good? And I'm like, no, I can give you several examples, right? Like, I don't think that's what commandments were for. They weren't given to us as some equation that life is just going to be awesome now. No, they were given to us to have a relationship with God, to find strength in when life is not going well, right? And so I remember just going back to that leadership context of when I was at the young bishop, I couldn't figure it out. Like, well, I'm doing all these behaviors and things seems to work for me. And he is too, but he keeps relapsing or keeps returning to pornography. Why is that? I didn't realize that the dynamic was shame. His identity was being attacked, not his behaviors or anything like that. And so if we can figure out those dynamics of shame and start there and realize that we are fully accepted through the grace of Jesus Christ today, even if we never change, then we begin to change. It's a paradox.
So I love the idea in the the primary sense of singing, I am a child of God. It's actually one of my favorites, jokes aside. I think that knowing that is life-changing, but I want to recreate a scenario that I feel like would not be the way that this works. But, for the sake of this, the bishop, I get to play the part of the bishop. The only time I'll play the bishop,
Bishop Steadman,
and you get to play the part of someone. Pick a sin, doesn't
Bishop
matter.
R. Thomas Steadman, right?
Yes, that's my apostolic name, so it'd just be Richard T. Steadman as a bishop.
Okay,
and I welcome you, and I'm like, hey, great to see you, Curtis.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
I want you to know that you are a child of God. Mm-hmm. Do you know that? Do you feel like that? To me, I think that if we can convey that. But there seems to be like some sort of like, I don't know, maybe it's a little wooiness or like, and you start to get into your sin. You're like, but I've been looking at stop. You're a child of God. Uh-huh. I think if we can affect that mind shift, I think that that's the way that goes. But I don't know how we facilitate that really like, no, but also a child of God, but also he loves you, but also, all of those things. How do we then do that? If people are listening to this and going, yeah, I don't want people to feel the shame. I want them to know their divine identity. Mm-hmm. Oh, but I do this. Yeah, but also, how do we do that? Yeah,
great question. So I think our natural response, whether as a parent or a church leader or as a friend, we default to behaviors. Like, well, so what's going on? Like, oh, you're struggling with pornography or whatever it is. Like, oh, tell me about your internet filters, right? Yeah. We automatically kind of go to that. Let's figure out this behavior. Once we get the behavior figured out, we'll get to the grace, and it's beautiful. Sure. Let me tell you what, when we get there, it's going to be worth it.
In the Greek translation of grace, and we start to, sorry, I can't help it.
But what if instead of like going after the behaviors in appointment 1, what if because it's important, we need to talk about that. Sin will destroy you. And if you...
Do you hear that?
And if you allow a sin in your life, it will destroy you quickly or slowly at whatever speed you want. Yeah. But what if we just got to that, maybe the 10th appointment?
Yeah.
And that first appointment is just them having a friend, a person where they can come to and say, I am so buried in shame right now. I keep doing these things. And that friend's just listening, right? You don't have to read a scripture. You don't have to say, well, have you tried A, B, and C? You just like, wow, like I'm just going to sit with you in that. And I'm so sorry that you're there. I put this in the book. I talk about the gospel continuum. where on one side you have love, grace, acceptance. On the other side, you've got commandments, covenants, the behavior side.
Sure.
And a lot of us don't see us that we're actually swinging on this behavior. And a lot of people will say, well, the gospel is just about love, Richie. Let's just love them, right? Like, well, I don't really know what you mean by that. But I would say the gospel begins with love, because commandments, behaviors, and covenants are still important. Right. But we must first swing over to the love side of the continuum. And as you know, with a pendulum, when you pull it up on one side, what does it do?
It clacks back and hits the other 4 balls.
That's right.
And then goes the other way.
That's right. It'll swing the other way. And the higher up we go on the love side, the deeper is the potential of going into the commandments and covenants and the behavior side. So by us starting on that love side, because some days I don't need the general conference talk that tells me the 10 things I should be doing. Right. Sometimes I just need Elder Holland to just envelop me in a hug and be like, Kurt, you're just loved, and Jesus loves you. And I just love how he, it's so poetic how Elder Holland puts it. Other days though, I need President Oaks kind of being like, all right, here's the doctrine, A, B, C, like, wow, okay, because that's important too. But a lot of the time we need that feeling of acceptance of, Richie or Kurt, like, as your bishop, like, this office is always open to you. Like, let's just talk. Like, I don't have any demands for you. I don't have a steps 1 through 5 plan, but can we just sit together and read, like, how is Jesus showing up for you as you struggle? Because this would be so hard, right? I remember another instance as a bishop, this individual, he's in his 30s, single guy, and he was struggling with pornography and masturbation, and it was obvious this was happening when he was experiencing a lot of stress at work.
Sure.
He did not know how to cope with life. And so that's an easy answer is sin or pornography and masturbation. And so as we talked, I realized it wasn't about the behavior at all, because he opened up to me and shared with me this tragic instance as a child being sexually abused. And just like, my heart broke for him, right? And now if I came over like, great, sad story. Yeah. Now, if we can just get the behaviors right, no, the behaviors are happening because of that instance, and that's where the healing needs to happen, right? And that's where the shame, just pouring shame into his life that he experienced that, and as many sexual abuse victims do, they blame themselves, and it's just awful, right? And so I begged and pleaded him, let's get you some counseling. I will cover whatever cost it takes, and the shame of all, he just refused to go there, and it just broke my heart to see that individual just keeping coming in thinking, maybe I meet with the bishop one more time, maybe that will fix it. But no, the shame was the problem, that wounding that happened so long ago. And so in that moment, he didn't need the President Oaks talk. He didn't need the hey, let's go over the law of chastity. Maybe you just don't understand that behavior enough. He needed that love. And so we can't swing to covenants and commandments and behaviors until they feel that full acceptance and are ready to swing that way.
Do you think that it's a human behavior response in that, like, the checklist or the commandments, or like I came through my first religious meeting and was sort of palmed the miracle of forgiveness to read, right? Do you feel like it's just sort of an easier human behavior to give a task, and that's why we do it? Because I think, and I'm trying to think of any of the opportunities I've had to meet with any sort of like ecclesiastical leader, like it's always the teach the doctrine and then exhort to do something different. And so if I came away from, a meeting really with anyone, but especially with someone that I feel like is trying to help me with something, and all I sort of did was say, this is kind of what I'm feeling. I wonder if, like, the leader then feels sort of ineffective because they didn't say, hey, do this thing different. Right. And that's, and so not that they don't want to help, not that they aren't whatever, but they just feel like the model is show a lot of love. Here is a task or a couple of tasks or a checklist of things to do. Yeah.
So the reality is going with the checklist, that's a very pragmatic thing. Like, I know what to do. Right. And hey, here's, have you thought about singing a hymn, or, here's a book that'll give you some skill sets to do that. But being empathetic and being able to sit in love and defaulting love, that's very difficult. And I empathize for leaders who are just like, Kurt, I just don't know how to do that. Or even parents like, but no, the behaviors need to change, Kurt. You don't understand. Like, this is a problem. I just love
them and they just keep doing it.
Yeah. And so all we know is we think, okay, I think what I do is I sit here and I say, Richie, I love you. Now, let's talk about that internet filter. Like, no. Like you've got, this is something you have to practice, learn about, and obsess over. How do you sit with somebody? And one of the strongest phrases that I use and that I felt God show up to me in my life many times is the phrase, Richie, you could look at pornography the rest of your life and I'd still love you. Like nothing could change. You could come back here again and again to this office, or you could call me as your father again and again and again. And with this problem messing up, and I would just still love you. Like I'm not concerned about that.
Right.
I just want to make sure that you feel that. And like, how can we get there? And maybe let's just read some stories of Jesus for the next 5 appointments. Let's just dive into his ministry and see what he has for us, right? And then by the time you get to that 10th appointment, the 15th appointment, whatever, or that interaction, they feel it and they're like, okay, like, and this is the beauty of grace, as the church website defines it. It is the enabling power of the atonement of Jesus Christ. Like it enables you to do something, because when I feel completely accepted by God, even though I keep messing up, even though I'm broken, even though I'm mortal, I can't help but turn to him and say, how do I become like you? I want to be like you. I want to love and accept like you. And then he'll say, oh, let's swing over to the other side of the continuum, because I've got commandments and covenants for you to do, not so that you will earn something, but so you can become something, so that we can have a relationship together, and I will mentor you on this path. And that's a beautiful relationship. And so it's easy to default to the behavior side, because I don't know how to do the love side. I mean, I did that. It took about 5 minutes, and now we're done.
Yeah,
so,
he loves you. Yeah. So anyway, Alma 37.
Yeah, right.
So the book then, Is God Disappointed in Me? Tell people a little bit how it reads. What I don't think it does, but I would love it if it did, is it's like, so, chapter 1. So, you think God hates you. Well, is it instructional for leaders being able to meet with people? Is it the people that feel like, man, I did that extra thing that God, he forgives lots of other people.
Right.
But not this guy. Like who and what and how? Yeah.
The easiest way to say it is that this book is for anybody who, while engaging in the gospel of Jesus Christ, has ended up in this place of overwhelm, like frustration and shame, right? That, I'm just thinking like that mother who's like doing it all, and she just, at the end of her day, she can't seem to figure it out. Her kids are a mess. They haven't bathed. They've barely eaten. They show up to church, 10 minutes late every week, and they look across the pew and they think, how do the Steadmans figure it out?
No one thinks that. I appreciate that.
But the point being is, it's so easy to compare, like, man, the bishop just has it all together, and that's why he's the bishop.
Sure.
And if I could figure it out, like, God just must be disappointed in me. Like, if you're feeling that, you've swallowed false doctrine along the way. And so I spend the first couple of chapters sort of breaking this down of, why do you see God as this disappointed parent in the heavens that's pacing in his family room thinking, oh, there Richie goes again. He just can't figure it out. Obviously, how long has he been in the church? And doesn't he get it yet? Right? Like, that's not God, because that's not grace. And disappointment and grace cannot coexist. Never does the deacon walk up to you on Sunday with the sacrament and then, as a representative of Jesus Christ, roll his eyes when Richie has to take the sacrament one more time, right? Or never does the bishop show up on Sunday and be like, well, I think everybody have a good week. Great, we'll just forego the sacrament because, we're generally pretty good, right? No, like, it is assumed that is the pinnacle of that meeting, and that the grace of that deacon walking up to you, you don't have to get out of your chair. He comes to you and says, here it is again, Richie, my salvation. Take it, eat it, and I'll come back next week. I love the scripture in Romans 6:6 of dragging your old man into church and crucifying him with Jesus. Like, that's what we're doing. Of course you've messed up this week. That's why you're here. And here's my grace, and take it again. And that is so encouraging to me when I frame it that way and walk out of sacrament meeting. I'm ready to take on another day because I feel his hope, his redemption, his encouragement through his grace.
Have you felt in your life like God has been disappointed in you?
Absolutely.
Like what? And how did you work your way through it?
So this is the stigma. If I was a better podcaster, I'd know the episode number of when you were on. But we've shared your story,
sure,
which includes excommunication and
you can say it.
Excommunication.
Loss of membership.
Lost of membership. Yeah. But and there's a lot of stigma in your story compared to mine, right?
Sure.
Like, Richie, and even you mentioned
what did he do?
and even you assuming you'll never be a bishop because of that.
No, I won't be, but I get it.
But I hope some policy will change because you'd be a great bishop.
Thanks. That's very kind of you. Never. Yeah.
So, but in my story, people look at my story and be like, wow, Kurt was bishop at 28. Like, nice, dude. Like, in his stake presidency at 33. And he's got this podcast. And he's like well respected, and he's sort of figured life out, right?
Moderately respected.
This is, I don't know.
No.
But it's easy to look at, to be, and from my side of my eyeballs, I'm thinking, oh yeah, I've got an image to keep up here, you know. And I remember being that little boy in church who I heard people say to my parents, wow, your kids are so great. Like, isn't it awesome? Like, they're just always so well behaved, and they know all the answers in seminary, right? And I remember hearing that thinking, oh, I have to be a certain way. I can't let them know who I am, until it came time for me as a youth to go talk to the bishop because I had messed up, right? And I remember the shame of not letting my parents know about it, secretly going into the room before cell phones, right? I'd have to go in my parents' room, and I called the 60-year-old executive secretary, and just like so filled with shame that I would have to tell him what I did, and then showing up outside the bishop's office. And I remember just sitting there, just wanting the building to just fall down on me, because I must have been the only youth in the history of my ward that ever had to set up an appointment with the bishop, right? Yeah. Obviously, I had a loving bishop, and I reference him a little bit in the first few chapters of just that love and grace I felt, and I got through it to say. But then it was like, okay, I got to go on the mission. I'm the youngest of 4. My 2 brothers have been zone leaders. Like, I got to be the missionary that earns that zone lead. Well, it didn't happen, right? And I just felt defeated. Right. I come home, and my brother gets a full ride to BYU. I get 3 rejection letters from BYU, and have to settle for a different college. And then it's just this overwhelm, I got to keep up. I got to do the things. I got to be something where people will accept me. And even, and then the thing came time for me to be called as bishop. And I remember going to my parents' house after receiving the call, and finally, like, being able to tell them, like, Mom, Dad, like, I'm going to be a bishop. Like, and I didn't say the words, but in one form, I'm saying, do you accept me now? And I'm sure if I would have said that, my parents would have looked at me like, what is wrong with you? Like, we love you. Yeah. Of course we love you, right? Sure. But this is the slyness of the adversary inserting shame into our life, where you've got to earn it, Kurt. Like, come on, like, you're better than this, right? And that shame is, even without the stigmatized sinning that maybe some experience. And I remember that this grace moment, being at a conference, and they were playing. It was a Christian conference, and they were playing some Christian worship music before, and I just felt like this incredible grace moment where God whispers in my mind, Kurt, you could never read your scriptures again, and I'd still love you. You could never be another leader again, and I'd still love you. Like, I want you to I love you. And I just remember it was just so transformational, that grace that I felt, where I thought, wait, you're not disappointed in me? Yeah. Like, but I've done, like, I haven't done some things I should have done, right? That should have word. And that it was transformational. And he's like, no, I'm inviting you into a relationship with me. That's why we do the covenant thing. That's why we do the commandments, because I want to be with you. I want to walk with you. I want to develop you in something, not because you earned it, because my son did that thousands of years ago. Today, I just love you, right? Because he swung me in that love, and that gave him a momentum to find healing and restart into approaching checklists and commandments because of the reason God put them there.
Yeah. One of the things that I hear, especially about with really driven people, right? That when they start to have this discussion about grace, that it's like, oh, that's going easy on yourself. Not necessarily that they feel like shame, like God is disappointed in me, but like they use some element of shame or some sort of negative element to propel them forward, meaning, I have to be able to rise to these things, or there's nothing wrong with wanting to be a zone leader, for instance, because your brothers were, right? You wanted the experience. They told you about these amazing experiences about being able to help missionaries or be able to, travel and be able to see those things. And so where it gets muddy for some people is this idea of if I just let grace, oh, well, it's fine that I didn't reach any of my goals, and it's fine that I don't do the diet, and it's fine that I don't treat my kids well because grace is so great. I think that there is a really hard stigma that people have. Like, they'll allow it to a point, and then they're like, yeah, now you're just going easy on yourself.
Yeah, because here's the thing, and people they'll respond to a lot of these perspectives I've shared of like, well, Kurt, listen, I was raised in a home and there was a lot of shame in that home, but there's some expectations in place that we go to church and we do this and that, and that's just who we are. We serve missions. We get Eagle Scout awards, and they say, look, Kurt, I turned out great. I'm not a criminal. I'm active in the church. Like, what's the problem?
Right.
And let me be very clear, like shame works. Yeah. Like, and even every day I'm tempted with my own kids, like, maybe I just sprinkle a little shame here. We can get going and get out the door because
like
he just doesn't.
Quicker if we can
Right. So I admit, like, it works, right? And some people feel like, well, I kind of like perceiving God as a little bit disappointed because it gets me moving. I correct my ways and I get back on track, and that's fine, I guess. But that's not the nature of God. And so you can use that as sort of a whip yourself to get moving. But that's not the God of grace, because disappointment and grace cannot coexist. Or we want to create this God who's angry at us and like coming for us, and hell, he's got the key to hell, and he'll open that door and lock us in there forever if we don't get moving. But that's not the gospel. I mean, I would love for anybody to sit down and articulate that's the Jesus that came and saved us, that he wanted to scare us really bad so that we'd go to heaven. No, he wanted to love us unconditionally and overwhelmingly. So that we would want to go to heaven. We'd want to be there, not because we were forced to or scared to be there.
Yeah, there's some Old Testament stuff that I might be able to contend with.
Sure.
Where it's like,
Right. And here's the thing with that. Like, people say, Kurt, there sure seems to be a lot of scriptures where God seems not just disappointed, but
pretty bad.
Like, right. Yeah. And I try and be clear that, like, there's, like, as we enter that relationship, there will be those tough coaching moments where God has to get in our face and say, like, listen, Richie, I love you. You know I love you, but things got to change. Right. Like, these things you're doing, I'm trying to mentor you into this relationship, and these are impeding you. And so I'm not disappointed that you're doing this, because I'm doing the long game here, and my son took care of this, but let me help you through this. And so let me coach you very strongly here, right? Yeah. So, and sure, maybe I'll get to the other side, Richie, and God will be like, hey, cute book you wrote there, Kurt.
And the answer is yes,
I was actually quite disappointed in you and your book and your publishing and the typos you made or whatever. And I'd be like, dang, missed it. But guess what? Like, day to day living my life, I've never been more anxious to keep covenants. I've never been just give me more commandments. Even you'll mention on like a cup of coffee. Really, we're gonna get to heaven, right? And be like,
and God's like, listen,
not.
I'm looking this over.
Right.
Folgers, huh?
Right.
All right.
But the way I see it is like, give me more commandments. You want me to not drink coffee? I want to drink coffee. Like, whatever it is, no matter how arbitrary it seems, I just want to, like, put me in the game, coach. Like, I want to become like you. And if that's what you require, and I don't know why, well, whatever. Like, I'll do it because that grace and encouragement I feel, rather than this, the Old Testament God of like fire and brimstone, get moving, Kurt. Like, no, that's not God.
Yeah. I have to ask you about the book writing process itself. You've got like 100 kids, and I know you moved at one point, and you lived with in-laws at one point. Listen, any kids is 100 kids.
It's true, especially on a plane.
Yes. The process of being able to like have the focus to do that, because you're also cranking out a couple episodes of, Leading Saints every week, plus you're trying to show up as a partner and a dad and all the things. Like, how were you able to do this?
That's a great question. Now, I'll answer it this way. In the book, I talk a lot about my 5-year-old son. He's 9, Richie. So, it was just one of those things of like, I'm going to write this book, even if it takes 30 years to write. And little by little, and then, I get the manuscript done, and then I have people read it and be like, Kurt, it's fine. But chapter 1, you lost me there. I'm like, oh, man, I'm not done yet? Dang it. So I rewrite a few things, and then you give it to professional editors, and they're like, all right, like, this is cute that you're trying to write a book, but let me educate you. And then you're like, so I went through like 5 editors, professional editors, and then you're like, how do I do a book cover? And I need an ISBN number. Like, how do I do that? Right. So you just learn these things along the way, but just like anything, you just say, I'm just going to do a little bit every day or every week or maybe once a month. And here I am. I did it. I got to the end of the marathon.
So jokes aside, because I did, sort of take stabby at you at the beginning of this, but do you feel like it was something that God was like, I need you to write this book?
Yeah, I mean, the experiences, I guess it was more of like, whether anybody reads it or not, like, I now have this record for my children to be like, let's just learn about like dad's journey through repentance and becoming more saintly, and how he handled covenants, commandments. And so I never, even with leading saints, I mean, I felt like sort of an echoing call in the distance part of heaven, like, keep going, Kurt, keep going, right? Rarely is it like, all right, Kurt, this is the title of the book. Here's the 9 chapters you need to write. But I felt like this is going to be a book someday, and even, I'll just keep at it. So. Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I think that's fun to see the way that, not only to take something where it was just like, this is good information, but then to be able to commit to it and do it. It's not easy.
Right. And I think your experience with the Culture Hall is similar, right?
I mean, it's not easy.
but you've been doing it for so long.
But I haven't written a book. Well, that's the thing.
You've done a lot of episodes. It's a lot of time. Right?
Sure.
I think God is in this. I want you to know that.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
100%. Quite honestly, like sometimes people will be like, why do you do the Cultural Hall? And I'm like, I'll say it's a lot of things, but I think for me, it's like my faith in podcast form, every week.
I think it's helped you on some of those hard weeks or whatever, right?
Sure, sure. Just to be able to do that, or to just be like, other people got questions, right? Do you have questions? Yeah, I do. Yeah. Oh, good.
Yeah.
All right, I'm not alone as far as
another thing I'll say, like with writing a book, I often say, like, it's not just about knowing the gospel or believing the gospel, but can you articulate the gospel? Mm-hmm. And so the exercise of like sitting down and being like, these concepts make sense in my head, but could I articulate it in word that other people would understand what I'm thinking? And that process of doing that, you get halfway and you're like, oh, wait, there's this whole other caveat that I need to explore. And wow, I'm learning more, right? And I wish, some people use like ghostwriters, right? They'll be like, I'm just going to drive, in my car and tell you what the book is about. You make it sound good and make it come all together. But I'm like, I don't know if I could do that, just because, half the book I discovered on the journey, these principles of like, or people would push back on certain things like, oh yeah, that's right, I should probably, answer that question through the book. So it's a journey worth having.
The baby is out into the world, in that some people have read the book at this point of us recording. What have people said so far? And how nerve-wracking is that when you go, all right, here you go. I started when he was 5 and now he's 9. So,
Yeah. Oh, this
like
is
professionally, I think you get it, where you go, okay, someone professionally, I should have put a period as a comma in that. You go, you're a business savvy person that you go, I welcome those things. But when you start to be like, all right, peers, all right, people that I'm trying to help, what do you think of this? What is that experience?
No, this is interesting you bring up, because like I did like a book launch event last week, and so I'm thinking, who am I going to invite? And, I've got a lot of friends like at BYU who are religion professors. And I'm like, oh, well, he probably doesn't need to know about the book, because if he read it, actually, John Hilton,
John Hilton
the third, right? BYU religion professor, phenomenal guy. I gave him the manuscript to go over it, and I was like, oh man, and I sort of, buffered it with like, hey, listen, like there's probably some heresy in here, but
it's probably not good, right. And you're not going to like it.
Yeah.
But if you wouldn't mind, I've wrote it here.
And he came back with a lot of feedback. So like, hey, Kurt, like I get what you're saying here, but I don't know how doctrinal this is. That's not why I'm not a doctrinal guy, but I just want to take people on a journey where they think different. He's like, oh, okay, well, maybe just this and that, right? And so, but he was kind enough to write at first I was like, hey, listen, you don't need to write a what do you call it?
A foreword?
A
review?
A review.
An epilogue.
The front of the quote. You don't have to give me a quote about it, right?
Yeah.
But he was like, no, this is a good book, and I'm glad you wrote it. And there are those people I'm like, I'd love to send to my bishop who when I was growing up, but maybe BYU professor, hey, listen, you just do you like this. But my ego comes out a lot in it. And there's some people and another part is even myself, like the last 2 chapters, I'm like, as I was reading for the audiobook, I was like, what, Kurt, like you're being so redundant, and like how did I miss this? I should have rewritten it. But it was like, it's done. It's out there. Take it for what it is. Maybe you'll hate it. Maybe you won't. But my goal is not necessarily convince anybody that they should see God my way, that he's not disappointed, but maybe sit with it and wrestle with these concepts, and maybe walk away disagreeing with me, but maybe you've at least thought about it.
Have you had anyone disagree with you yet?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's
Tell me about the haters who are going to hate.
Well, it's just more of like just like any, parent, just that person like, hey, no, like I'm sure I use a little shame, but come on, like we gotta get things done in my home, and we got, or I gotta get my
Francom's, we are front row family,
or we gotta get our kid on a mission, and whatever it takes, we're gonna get him there. And you may not have a strong testimony, but he'll get out there and he'll do it. Like, okay, like you can do that, and I pray for you. Maybe that'll work. Maybe I'm completely wrong, and all my kids will end up in federal prison, and
at least the one.
Yeah. We pray for him.
I was going to leave a generic. Now they know it's at least a him. Gee.
Yeah. So I don't mind if people disagree with me, just as long as you know why you're disagreeing with me. And maybe it is the Old Testament God, and we'll just get up and be like, oh my goodness, that guy's bad. Like, but I just don't. That's not been my experience, and that's not a redemptive message, because we're not. I don't want to be a high demand religion. I want to be a high redemptive church. I want people to leave church feeling like, I'm so glad I went, rather than I'm just never good enough for those people. And I hate that.
Yeah. How do we do, kind of in a bigger thing, sort of taking not just the subject of shame, but expanding it out. Something that I've thought about quite recently is like how we could just be more kind of welcoming and or loving as far as a ward goes. You're recently in a new ward in a new area. You're in Utah County, so I suspect I know how this went. But like, you get into the new place, are people kind, welcoming? Were you overjoyed with how people treated you, or were you like, this is underwhelming?
No, it's a new development area, so everybody's new. So it's sort of like, you can show up and be like, why is nobody talking to me? And like, they're just thinking, why is nobody talking to me? Because we're all new. But no, my ward has been phenomenal and great. It's interesting, even in I've been to several like state conferences, right? And serving in a state presidency, I remember that feeling of like, all right, guys, we get this opportunity once every 6 months. Let's make sure we're clear, we're strong, and we're deliberate, right? And it's so tempting for a leader or anybody like speaking in church or speaking in state conference to be like, hey, just want you to know, like, things got to change around here. Like that temple tents, I've seen the reports, folks, and can I just tell you how awesome the temple is, right? It's sort of this oversell of, but what if we just like offered a church where people could come? And a good example of this is actually Andy Stanley, who's I think he's Baptist. I watch his sermon every week on YouTube.
Interesting.
And his way, it is genius how he always, I forget how he frames it, that assume that they're in the room, where he'll talk on a message and be like, now, for those of you who aren't Christian, you may see this way, but for those of you that are, this is why I'm talking about the scripture. And I'm like, wow, that's interesting. He's assuming those people are in the room. Like, what if we assumed that message on the front plaque in front of the church, visitors welcome? What if we assumed like every week 30 people were actually just showing up? Like, what is this place? And are we formulating our message in a way of not just, hey, we could do a little bit better, but isn't it remarkable what Jesus did for us? And that like, you're back here again, and we just love you. And let's just be here together. And so that's the challenge, is anybody speaking in church, teaching elders quorum, teaching Relief Society, speaking in the state conference, can you do it without a mention of a change of behaviors? And we do this in such sly ways. We'll be like, brothers and sisters, when was the last time you really prayed? And I mean really prayed, right? Like on your knees for a half hour. Like I get what you're doing, but you're focused on behaviors. But when was the last time you just felt like you're loved, like you're here with us, no matter what you've done, whatever your background, you're here in the pews, and we're about to experience such a redemptive ordinance. And here we go. And there's no expectation, no reason to consider what you have done, but just be here with us and just be fully accepted. And what you'll find is everybody will leave that place feeling like, I'm going to find ways I can be better. I'm going to find ways that I can be in the right relationship with God. And it could be transformational.
We also talked sort of how almost cliche the idea of, your shoulds, you're shooting yourself and shame and all that. But it also seems like grace has been one of these things that in the last 10, 20 years, give yourself some grace. It started to become, far more popular as far as that goes. Interesting to note that you mentioned listening and observing other faith traditions and the way that they engage with grace. Do you see grace being spoken of in a different way, not necessarily from you, but from the greater church? Do you see the way that we're embracing grace different?
Yeah, for sure. Even from, I think I did an interview with Anthony Sweat where he wrote his book, Seekers Wanted, where he actually goes into the database of General Conference, and grace has like gone off the charts. Like the mention of grace has gone off the charts. And And that's encouraging to me, right? And this is the, in being in a restored church with prophets and apostles, we think, well, if it's good enough today, Kurt, why wasn't that happening in 1985? I think this is just the natural journey and wrestle that any organization, even prophets, apostles go through, is the messaging of it. Like, and we were learning that way, or that worked for them in that time, and now we're shifting as far as that messaging of it. And so I do see a shift there. And I'll be honest, there's some general conference talks I hear, and I'm like,
that is not
dude,
very
like I feel extremely shamed right now, right? And but I hold grace for them, right back. And that's the last couple of chapters of my book where I talk about grace for grace. The beautiful reaction to receiving grace is that you want to be more graceful, and you have more patience for leaders, and you're like, yeah, I don't necessarily agree with how you frame that message, but love you, brother. I know you're trying, and upward and onward.
One of the things that I find most fascinating about stuff like this is the way that spouses engage in it. Has your wife read your book, and what has that experience been like?
Bless her heart. She's not a big reader, but like even yesterday, she's like, I'm on to chapter 5. Like, she's getting through it, and she's grateful for it. But she's heard, several of my firesides, several of my episodes, so she kind of gets the key concepts I'm getting at. But obviously, I'm going in more detail. But yeah, I think, and it's interesting creating a home of grace, because believe me, if you follow me around with the camera, even this morning, we're late for school, walk into my 9-year-old's room, and he's doing Legos. It's like, dude. Like, we have got to go. Like,
I am being graceful, but get your butt in the car.
That's right, right? Yeah. So, those are those moments, and I think a powerful thing that I've learned as a parent is the power of apologizing to your children, right? And don't do it in a way of like, I'm just awful, I'm so sorry. I just
you see these ashes?
Yeah.
Do you see this sackcloth? That's how
right.
sorry I am.
But there's no sweeter moment that I've had than laying down with my son at night and just saying, like, Taste, buddy, like, I just messed up today, and I don't want you to have that kind of father. And I get worked up sometimes, and I'm very, I express myself vocally as a profession, so I yell sometimes, and I hate that. I just want like, I just love you completely, right? And for him to see that, witness that, I think is encouraging, and so more parents could probably do that as they establish a grace-filled home. And my wife and I are wrestling with that, because that's not always the case.
I like the idea too, because I've only briefly met your wife a couple of times, but the idea that she's like, oh, he thinks that, huh? Flips the thing.
Grace boy, remember that book you wrote? Oh, absolutely. There's many of those opportunities.
But to be able to do it, I mean, it's a tremendous undertaking, a thing that the idea of writing a book excites me. I have no idea what I would write about. I feel particularly called in any direction.
Coming
like
2025.
Oh my gosh! If I honestly really would.
That would be awesome.
Be super fun.
Yeah.
I don't know that because it's a lot of research. It's a lot of like works and reworks and those kind of things, and I don't know that I have a specific thing that I'm like, yeah. But I'm glad that that
maybe we could co-author something. That'd be fun.
Listen, if you write it, I'll put my name on whatever you write. Done. But people can find a link for it in the show notes. As we mentioned, look for it as we do the Cultural Hall Book Club, that Kurt will join us and be a part of that. Details to follow as far as all that stuff goes. But I think it's pretty exciting. And in a moment of seriousness, which I don't do very often, I think it's incredible what you do with leading saints. Mighty glad to know you, and the fact that you've got this book that I think is changing people's lives.
Thanks, brother.
Is pretty significant. There are 3 questions that we ask everyone who steps into the Cultural Hall. I've asked them of you before. I will ask them of you again. The first one is, do you have a calling? And if so, what is it?
I am. I am a ward podcaster.
That's your calling?
Yeah. So,
awesome.
like I said, we're in a huge ward that's probably going to be split here in a couple months. And,
Bishop Francom.
Oh, yeah, come on, get my application in. Right. I would love to do that calling again, right? Never say no to that calling. It is a phenomenal experience.
I will, but...
and so I approached my bishop and said, hey, listen, I know there's not a lot of callings to go around. This is something I have done in a past ward. What if I created a ward podcast, and I'll just go around and interview living histories of people in the ward? And he loved the idea. And so I jumped in, and it's I actually have a whole podcast episode dedicated to if other wards want to do this. And I've gotten a lot of emails saying, hey, we're doing it. So this is becoming a thing, which is cool, until I'm sure somebody in the handbook department shuts it down.
But for now.
but for now. And so, yeah, I just connect with different people in the ward, and it's phenomenal to sit down with someone for an hour, roughly, and just talk about their life, their faith.
You talk to them for an hour?
Well, 30 minutes to an hour.
Okay.
Yeah. What I don't like, well, we have 45 minutes left. What else do you want to? Well, but, as long as it takes. And then the ward gets to hear it. And I think I hate the tradition where, okay, you're speaking a sacrament meeting and you got to sort of, well, I do this for work and I've got 3 kids.
Sure.
And let's get on with Jesus. That's why we're there. So this, I'd rather have a different forum that we can learn about members of the ward, and it creates a unifying force that, man, I know Richie's story. Like when I sit down with him in elders quorum, I kind of feel like I know him and I have a starting place.
Do you have set questions? Like every time it's the same 5 questions?
No, I mean, I just sort of go through their life. Like, tell me about growing up. Like, how'd you get your testimony? Did you go on a mission? Why or why not? And where'd you go? What was that like? Right. So, you know the beat.
And it's just one-on-one. So do you do like the patriarch of the household first and then the matriarch, or are you doing I go through the bishop and the Relief Society presidency? What's that word? How do you?
So I've tried to do as many of the ward councils as possible, sort of set that example. Like, hey, they're doing it, you should do it, right? Yeah. And I get people to be like, I'm just not interested. I'm like, okay, you don't have to share your deepest, darkest.
Right. Jeez, I don't know why you hate me, pal, but fine if you want to keep your story secret.
But then I'll meet someone on the ward and be like, hey, we should do a podcast episode, and just do it over Zoom, make it really easy, and publish it.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. All right. If you could pick a calling for yourself, either one that exists or make one up, what would you pick?
I would love to be the guy that handles all leadership in the church. Maybe have like a podcast that I produce every week. And so the reality is I've picked my calling. Well, I feel like it is a calling from God, and but I love it. I want to be the leadership guy in the church.
So like appointed by the church? They're like, no longer you get paid for this, you do it for free.
I mean,
that's the calling?
It depends on what number they write down on, slide across the table.
That's not how callings work, Curtis.
Right. But no, if I got to the end of my life, like I want to serve a mission for 30 years and I'll just do leadership stuff for the church, travel around and help ward councils think about problems, and I would love to do that. So.
Yeah. The final question that we ask everyone, as you know, and you also have answered this before, but I find it shifts when people get asked it, is what is your favorite part of your faith?
So when and I think this is similar to my first response to this, but when I show up to church and that deacon brings me the sacrament, just like I said, like there's no expectation in that sacrament. It's just, here it is, Kurt, like take it again. Let's do this one more time. Like that grace is so propelling in my faith of why I show up to the temple, why I answer the temple recommend questions, not because I'm trying to earn something or pretend I am something else, but because God wants a relationship with me. And there's a Hebrew translation of the word righteousness, and because we read that all over in the scriptures, like the righteous people, right? But the Hebrew translation that frames it as right relationship. And so anytime I read righteousness in the scriptures, I read right relationship. And being in a covenant with God, I am generally in a right relationship. And even when I mess up, that relationship's there to turn to, receive strength from, and try once again. Yeah,
I love it. Again, find a link for the book in the show notes. You'll find a link also for leading saints and for all this stuff. Do you guys have another one of your online things that we'll be promoting alongside you guys coming up anytime soon?
We sort of hit all the big topics, so I'm still, but there's be some in the future, but nothing.
But nothing
coming
you want to
up
announce
too
here
soon.
with me.
I had to finish a book, Richie.
Okay.
I mean, come on.
You finish one book and then you don't have to do anything anymore.
Right.
That's fine. We hope that this episode has nourished and strengthened your body. That if you're not healthy enough to listen this week, that you'll be healthy enough to listen next week, and that when the time comes, you'll be able to travel home in safety. Kurt, in the meantime, we'll be saving a seat for you on the back row of the Cultural Hall.